Welcome to the Contact Podcast.
Oh yeah, baby.
So straight up, I don't know how this episode is going to go. Welcome into the Contact Podcast. I guess I should start with that. I'm your host, Donovan Jones. We had a very interesting week this past week. And so I just want to kind of share some of the things that happened over the course of this week with you guys. If you follow me on social media, you saw that I posted Tuesday how our oldest son, Landry, who, if you've been following the podcast for a while or on social media, he comes up frequently on both of those platforms. He had a seizure on Tuesday. And so it's almost kind of just now setting in. It's Friday night as I record this, so it's been a couple days removed from the actual incident, but it's actually kind of like setting in now, like, wait, this actually happened. Like, it was actually real. And so trying to like navigate through that, work through that, like, what does this look like moving forward? How did this happen? Why did this happen? Just questions that I know in my heart of hearts that moment did not come as a surprise to God. And if you reached out to me the day of, you might have gotten a text that said something like that, because from the beginning, I knew, well, I wouldn't say from the beginning, I would say when I got to him and Kelly, I knew this moment did not surprise God. This moment did not sneak up on God. He knew from the beginning of time that this was going to happen, and we are confident in that. And so I'm just going to run you through the events of kind of what happened here. And if you've been listening to the podcast over the last couple of weeks, you know that we're in the middle of a series of 15-minute talks. And obviously this episode's separate from that because I don't know how long this episode's going to go. I'm going to be kind of venting to you guys a little bit. And so here we go. I'm just going to start from the beginning. So Tuesday morning, it started off like any other Tuesday morning. I was at work running my route when around 7:40-ish, 7:45, I get a call. And my wife, she usually does not wake up till around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And so I'm like, okay, something's going on. So I answer the phone, and it's my daughter, Finley, our 10-year-old. And she's like, I think something happened to Landry. And I'm like, what do you mean you think? Like, what's going on? Is he sick? Is he throwing up? Like, what's the deal? She's like, I don't know. I think he had a seizure. And I was like, wait, what? And I can hear Kelly in the background saying, tell Dad that Landry had a seizure. And so I'm like, put Mom on the phone. Like, is he okay? What's going on? And she's like, I don't really know. And she was like super calm, by the way. Like I could hear Kelly in the background, like, what? Like, kind of like panicking in a sense. But Finley was just like cool, calm, and collected. Like, I've been here before. I've done that, And so she gives the phone to Kelly, and Kelly's like, he had a seizure. I don't know what the deal is. And she started kind of describing it to me. And she said that he had come and thank God had gotten into bed with her after I had went to work. And she said that it woke her up. He was just shaking, his whole body shaking. And she said it was almost like a movie, like the movies where you see where someone is like demon possessed and they're they're doing the exorcism on them and they're trying to pull the demon out of them or whatever, like that kind of shaking, just his full body. She said to the point where it was shaking the bed, and she was like, it felt like it was a movie. And she said, I'm like trying to, talk to him and stuff. And she said, it's like, 30 or 45 seconds. And she says he stops and his eyes kind of roll in the back of his head, and, not foam, but like clear, like, saliva or something starts coming out of his mouth. And she said initially she thought, oh my gosh, like he's dead. She said because he was just laying there like unresponsive, limp, and she's like trying to talk to him. And she said finally, she's like, are you okay? Are you okay? And she said he kind of shook his head no, and he was kind of making some grunting noises. And so she called 911, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm headed that way. And so I called my boss right away, and I'm like, hey man, my son just had a seizure or something. I got to go. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Bring the truck, go do what you need to do. Just to kind of give a little bit of background here before I tell this next part. My parents broke up. They split up when I was around 13, something like that. I was in like, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was like 6th grade going into 7th grade. So something like that, 12, 13, 14. It was somewhere in that range. And I remember whenever it happened, I was talking to my girlfriend, in which I know that that age is too young to have a girlfriend. But I remember I was talking to her on the phone about it, and I told her, I said, whenever I grow up, I want to have a son, and I want to name him Landry Jones. And so this was when I was, a kid, which 12, 13, 14 years old, you shouldn't even be thinking about having kids at that point, like, because you're a kid. But I was just like, I want to have a son, and I want to name him Landry. And when God gave me Landry, first of all, it was difficult for me and Kelly at first to have Landry. And then when it took a little bit of trying, not to get too detailed, but we found out she was pregnant. And I remember we went to the ultrasound that we were going to find out the sex of the baby, the gender of the baby. And I remember I was standing there and I was like holding my mom's hand, and Kelly's mom was on the other side of me. And my mom was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good." She was like, "You're shaking." And I'm like, I want this to be a boy, like I want this to be my Landry Jones, like the kid that I've been wanting since I was a little kid. And so he was a boy, and obviously, and we named him Landry. And, not that I love him. I love all my kids equally the same way, but there's just like a bond between me and him that he's I would say he's my best friend, And so I remember driving back to the yard, and at that point, I'm like not talking to Kelly. She's kind of texting me, but I can't text her because I'm driving, And she's called 911. 911's coming to the house, and I just remember I started praying on the way back to the yard, and I remember I was saying something like, I was just over and over again, like, God help him, God help him, God help him. And it almost, for a brief moment, I almost said, God, you can't do this to me. Like, you can't take him, and I know this might sound a little bit extreme, but that's where my mind went right away, especially because Kelly's like, he was unresponsive for a minute. So I didn't know, the severity of what's going on. So I was just like, God, this is something you can't do. And it's almost like, I don't know. I think there's certain times, and I'm trying to do better about this, and I think a lot of us struggle in this way, where I'll say, God, I'm doing X, Y, and Z for you, so you can't take this thing away from me, right? But it's like, just because we decide to serve God, just because we do what we are supposed to do and live our life trying to bring honor and glory to him, that does not mean that our life is just going to be exactly how we want it, and he's not going to do specific things that he's already had ordained from the beginning of time, right? Like, our obedience is not something that's going to make our lives a bed of roses, right? And a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how my word of the year is ascension, and I believe that this was a part of it. And I'm not trying to make this about me, but I'm just saying, like, internally, like, these are the things that I was thinking about. And so I'm driving and I'm praying, and I'm just over and over again, like, God help him, God be with him, God help him, God be with him, just over and over and over again. And I get to the yard, and as soon as I get there, my boss meets me, and he just gets in the truck and he's like, go. And I don't really remember anything else until I got to the hospital. So like, I know I was praying just that same thing over and over again, like, God help him, be with him, God help him. And so I'm like calling Kelly. I'm like, hey, I just got to the hospital. Where are y'all at? She's like, well, we're on the way. So I beat the hospital there, and I call my pastor, and I'm like, hey, Landry had a seizure. And he's like, where are y'all at? And I told him. He's like, I'll be right up there. And so, man, big shout out to Patrick Williams. And there's a lot of people that I'm going to thank. So stay tuned to the end, because I'm not going to be able to say all of the names, but I do have a very special thank you to all of you guys. So I called him, and then I called a good family friend of mine and Kelly's, Angie. And she's kind of like the undesignated, like, I don't even know what you call it. Like, she brings the groups together, like the different, like the ladies groups, the Sunday school groups, all of those things. And so she put it in the group chat, like, be praying for Landry and all that. And so thank you to Angie if you're watching this. And so then I was standing there in the ER, and I'm waiting, and I'm watching the different ambulances come in. And I text her, and I'm like, text me when you get here, call me something, And then I see one pull up, I'm like, I bet that's it. So I call her and she's like, no, that's not us. And I'm like, all right. So I'm standing, I'm waiting. And I see another one pull up a couple minutes later and she's like, we're here. And so I walk up, and as I'm walking up, the driver of the ambulance gets out and he's just like looking at me. And I'm like, I think you got my little boy in there. And he's like, do I? And I'm like, what? Why are you like? He's kind of like speaking in riddles to me, like almost like I'm not trying to kidnap him. Like I'm telling you, this my son in there. Like he's just acting super weird, and so he's just kind of standing there looking at me. I'm like, is there a mom and a son in the back? And he's like, there's a little boy back there. I'm like, okay, that's probably my son. Like my wife texted me she was here, and so then he goes to the back and he opens it, and I go around the door, and as soon as he opens it, I see Landry sitting there in that stretcher, and he looks just terrified. And Kelly's sitting there beside him, and she's obviously scared. Leading up to this point, let me just say this: I was a wreck on the way. Like I said, I'm like telling God, like, this is something you can't do, and obviously God can do whatever He wants. He doesn't need our permission. But in that moment, I was just like scared, terrified, like what's going to happen to my little boy? Like, this is the dude that I've been waiting for. Like, he's here. Like, I'm not trying to make it like too biblical, like blow it out of proportion, but it's like Abraham and I is like Abraham's like, I've been waiting for this dude for 25 years. And then you give it to me, God. Now you're telling me you're going to kill, like, I got to kill him. I got to sacrifice him up to you. And so it's obviously it's not that far. And I get there, and as soon as I'm waiting for them, before that ambulance pulls up, I said, I have got to be strong, because we teach our kids that we are to have confidence in God. We teach our kids that God is with us. And so if I'm going to tell my kids that, I have to be an example of that when we're in the midst of some kind of trial, when we're in the midst of some kind of tribulation, even if it sucks, even if I like want to break down inside, like I have to be that for them in that moment to show them like this stuff is real. Like this is legit. Like God is with us. God gives us the strength to get through whatever situation that it is, even if it's not the easiest of situations. And so I just remember as soon as I opened that door and I see him sitting there, I was like, what's up, bro? What are you doing? And he looked like he was about to cry. And I'm like, you're good. And so they start pulling out the stretcher. And as soon as I could touch him, I grab his hands and I said, all right, let's pray. And you could tell that they were just wanting to get him inside. But I'm like, we're praying right here. You know what I mean? And so we just start praying right there. And, I'm holding his hands and I'm like, Lord, give him strength. Lord, give him boldness. Lord, give him confidence. Help him to figure out what the deal is. Just keep him safe, all of those things. So then we start to go in and I'm holding his hand all the way in, and he's like panicking because, Kelly tells me afterwards that he was out after he had the seizure. Like he was unconscious until they were loading him in the ambulance. And so you think like he didn't even know it happened. And so you go from dead asleep to now you're looking around, you got a bunch of strange guys like tying you up to it, a mat. Like that would be super scary for a 6-year-old, right? And so he's like trying to figure out what's going on. And so I see him, they take the blanket off of him and they're like, hey, can you step on the scales? And we need to get your weight. And so he's barefooted and I see him walk over there and he's long and tall and skinny and steps up on the scales and he's, 45 pounds. And I'm just thinking like, this is insane. Like this, I know this is not like this. It's not happening. Right. And so, and you can tell he's scared the whole time. And so, they get his weight and they put him back on the little gurney bed, whatever. They wheel him into a room. And like right around that time, we look up, me and Kelly look, and there's our pastor. And so he comes in and like automatically like a sense of, more peace came with his presence. And so I'm very thankful for that, like the way that the Lord used him in that moment. And so, the doctors are coming in, nurses are coming in and tell like, this is what the next steps, this is what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. And so they walk out and I put one of my hands on his head and one of my hands holding his hand. And I could tell like he was panicking and I'm like, we're going to pray again. And I said, and I asked our pastor, Patrick, I'm like, you can pray with him too. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And so, but first I said to Landry, I said, what's Proverbs 3:26? And this is a verse that we say every night. And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You know what it is. What's Proverbs 3:26? And he goes, the Lord will be your confidence. And I said, absolutely. I said, so we are confident that God is with us. This did not come as a surprise to God. And so we're confident in that fact that God's got you. No matter what is going to happen, God has you. And so I just want to read this passage really quick before I continue into this little story. But Psalms 139, verse 16 says, this is talking about God. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, talking about the days of your life. God has written out every single day. Therefore, he knows what's going to take place in each and every one of those days. He says, in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So that means before a single day of your life was lived, it was already written out. It was already formed for you by the Creator. He decided to write you into his story, give you an opportunity to live however many days that he has written out for you on this earth. It's not a shock to him. It's not a surprise. So we prayed with him. I prayed with him. My pastor prayed with him. And, from that point on, we were just trying to get him to, hey, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be good. And one thing, obviously it's a sucky situation for him to go through, but one thing that I'm very glad that one reason I'm very thankful of something, I guess I should say would be a better way of wording it, that came out of it was in that situation. I might not have handled everything the best way that I possibly could, but I do know that I think it gave us an opportunity for him to see, okay, when we're praying to God, when we're saying these verses, like the Lord will be our confidence, like this is not just something that we do before we go to bed. Like this is actually something that Dad lives by. This is something that we live by. So like this is something that's applicable from my life. Like God is with me throughout my day. God is with me throughout my trials. And one thing that God really spoke to me through this is there are a lot of hard times in our lives. There's a lot of struggles. There are a lot of difficulties. But we get the opportunity to walk through this life with him as our confidence. We go through hard to get through harder. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, like God is with us. He gives us these different trials, these different tribulations. We go through hard to get through harder. Like you got to be able to build muscle to get stronger. You have to practice as hard as you can to get better. It's the same way with this life. If you're trying to do something for God, you got to go through hard to get through harder, like ultimately at the end of the day. And so, we're just kind of praying. We're trying to figure out what's going on. They start doing all these different tests, and they did a blood test on him. They did an electrolyte test on him. They did a CAT scan on him. They did an EEG scan on him, EEG test, and some of the terminology I'm probably jacking up, but I as he's getting the IV, he's a little bit scared and all of these things, and so I remember we go to the to go do the CAT scan, and Kelly goes, "You go in there with him. You're more calm than I am," and bless her heart. And so I go in there, me and him, and he's crying, scared, and he's looking at this big machine, and I'm like, okay, look, we gotta go through this. And he's like, I can't, I'm scared, I can't. And I said, look, we're not gonna be able to leave this room until you do it. And he's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And the nurse, she's like, hey, listen, buddy. And everybody was super, sweet, super, helpful and all those things. And they knew he was scared. So they were trying to help him out however they could. And he goes, I can't do it. And she says, hey, if you can't do it, we're going to have to put a seatbelt on you. Obviously he didn't know what that meant. And so he's like kind of looking around the room and he's crying. And I said, hey, look at me, look at Dad. And he looked at me and I said, listen, if you don't lay down and let them do this, they're going to have to tie you down to this table. And he just lays his head down right away and he stops crying and he goes through it. And I'm like, see, that was nothing, and he took it like a champ. We're going to have to go through some of these things in our lives that it's like, you're not going to be able to get out of this room without going through this specific thing. But on the other side of it, there's growth. On the other side, you see what you went through and like, okay, I can go through that again. And as a matter of fact, when we got home the next day, he was playing CAT scan like with his brother. He asked me to lay down on the couch and we got him a piano for Christmas that makes the different sound effects. And he was doing that and he was like, this is the sound that the machine made. And so that takes me to my second passage that I want to read. Like, we don't need to let fear, we don't need to let anything hold us back from continuing to move forward, to having boldness that God is with us to get through whatever circumstance that we're going through. 2 Peter chapter 2, the latter verse of 19, it says, for whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. We don't want to be enslaved to fear. We don't want to be enslaved to anything in this world We want to be free, walking in the freedom that Christ gives us. James chapter 1, verse 2 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." And so in these moments where our faith is tested, that's where growth comes. That's where God, who sees what he has for us beyond what we can see, allows us, through his grace with us, allows us to go through these different trials to get to a different place that maybe we didn't think we could reach before. God sees what we don't. The trials that we go through are to get us to the place that he sees for us. The last thing that I'm going to share about our little hospital stay was Landry said something very profound that really stuck with me. As he started going through all these testings, and he got bolder and braver as we went. And so it's like literally he's having his faith built in the moment. He was laying there, and one of the nurses came in, and we're waiting for some of these results to come back. And he goes, "Hey, I got to go." And they're like, "Whoa, wait, you can't go. We got, you got to stay, and we got to do these tests. We got to make sure you're good and this and that." And he goes, "No, I'm going to be late for work." And all the time he pretends like he has a job, like he'll go down in his bedroom, and I'm actually going to put a picture up, and you're going to see it right now on the screen of what he does, like what he says he does. He builds things is what he says in his room, and he has all these different employees that works with him. And so he told them, like, "I got to go. I got to get to work." And anytime a nurse came in after that, he kept saying something along those lines. And the biggest thing that stuck with me was he told them, "I got to go. I can't live here." And that really resonated with me, because I think a lot of times I'm going to be selfish in this moment and just apply this to what I'm going through in this season of life. I've been asking God for a specific thing, and I've been kind of stuck in a situation of I'm just waiting on God to tell me something, right? I'm just waiting for him to show me. I'm just waiting for him. And almost at times we can wait for God to force us into something, and God's not going to do that. Like, God gives us opportunities, but he's not going to push you into it. He's going to tell you, like, "I have this for you. If you want it, follow it," that kind of thing. And him saying, "I can't live here," that's a word for all of us. Wherever you're at in your life that is hindering you from moving on into what God has for you, you can't live there. Like, you have to move. You have to keep going. You have to get to work. I think of Joshua chapter 1, where God tells Joshua, "Everywhere that you step your foot, I'm going to give you that land." But first, Joshua has to take a step. He can't just stand there and God's going to give him all this land. Like, he has to take action and move. Like I said earlier, we go through hard to get through harder. The things that God sees for us, we have to go through specific things to get to them. I think about when I was in high school. I played basketball. I talk about it a lot on here. And I remember specifically my sophomore year, before the season started, we had a new basketball coach, and he was a younger guy. I think at that time he was probably, like in his early mid-20s. And I remember before the season started, he was like, telling me, "I want you to be our go-to." He was like telling me different things, like, "I want you to be our go-to guy. You need to, be ready, this and that." And I was like, "I'm ready, I'm ready." And I remember as the season progressed, we were a very young team. We had no seniors on our team. We were all sophomores and juniors, and a majority of the team was sophomores. And I remember it felt like in practice and in games, he was riding me harder than the other players. And I remember at like in halftime and stuff, he would say stuff to me. He would dog me out. But this other guy who played like crap, I'm not just being honest, like, was not playing very well. He wouldn't say really anything to him. And I remember about midway through the season, I was just tired of it, because I felt like he was just dogging me all the time, or he was just looking for opportunities to dog me. And I remember I finally said something to him. I'm like, "Yo, what's the deal, coach?" And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, "Why are you constantly dogging me? Like, you're not saying anything to anybody else. I never hear you saying anything to anybody else." And probably looking back, I'm sure he was coaching up everybody else as well. But in that moment, I just felt like you're picking on me, one of those kind of things. I'm like, why aren't you saying anything to anybody else? You're dogging me out. You're calling me out in games, in the locker room after the game and halftime and all those things. And he was like, isn't that what you wanted me to do? Like, you told me at the beginning of the season, you wanted to be our go-to guy. Like, you told me at the beginning of the season that you wanted to be someone that we can rely on in bigger games. And I was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, I'll slack off of you if you want. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, he was giving me what I asked for. Like, if you want to be that person, if you want to be that guy, you got to go through these different like challenges where the coach is like, hey, you got to be better. Like, you got to do better. Like, if you want to be that, you got to play better. You can't live where you're at right now and get to the level that you're wanting to get at. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, he saw more for me than I saw for myself. So he was trying to get me to a level that I was standing back and complaining, saying, why is this guy riding me so hard, when he was just trying to get me to the place that I had been asking him to get me to at the beginning of the year. And it's the same way with God. Like, there's a lot of times God allows these trials to come into our lives to build us, but we just want to sit back and complain. I just want to live in this space of regret. I just want to live in this space of guilt. I just want to live in this space of grief. I just want to live in this space of fill in the blank, when God is saying, I'm trying to move you to the next level, but you're not wanting to progress. You're wanting to stay where you're at. And so just to circle back to Landry, he has all these tests. We get the results back, and they're saying that he is diagnosed with epilepsy. And so we're trying to navigate through that. What all does that look like? What all does that mean? And I remember they said, do you have any questions? And I was like, this might sound extremely shallow, that's what I'm thinking. But I'm like, he plays basketball. Can he play this weekend? And she's like, yeah. And we're like, really? I thought there would be some kind of restrictions on it. She's like, no, he can play. Like, don't let him climb up trees, super high, trees or climb up anywhere that's above like, a certain amount of feet. I think it was like 6 feet or something. Don't let him swim in the pool by himself. All the things that we already are kind of on him about. And so it's just one of those things that we don't know what really to expect moving forward. But we're confident in the fact that God is not a mystery to him. Like, he knew all of these things were going to happen. He knows if he's going to have 50 more seizures in his life. He knows if that was the one and only one that he is going to have. But it's not a mystery to God. And so we're confident in that fact. Proverbs 3:26, the Lord will be your confidence. Wednesday night, it was very interesting because we were going through Ephesians, and in Ephesians chapter 2, it tells us, and I can't remember the verse off the top of my head, but it says that Jesus, he himself will be our peace. And so the Lord will be your confidence. The Lord will be your peace. Jesus will be your peace. And so I just think about that fact, and Moses is standing in front of the burning bush, and he says to God, who am I supposed to tell the people sent me? What name am I supposed to give the people of the one who sent me? And God said, I am. Proverbs 3:26, the Lord will be your confidence. Ephesians chapter 2 says, Jesus, he himself will be your peace. Psalms tells us that Jesus is a refuge for us. So we don't have to be all of those things because he is. He says, I am. We are not. At the end of the day, we don't have to wring our hands and worry and say, how am I going to do these things? And stress and say, how am I going to get to this place? How am I going to receive peace? How am I going to have confidence? How am I going to seek refuge? He is all of those things. And what I am learning as we're going through Ephesians is everything that we have is in Christ. In the 6 chapters of Ephesians, that phrase in Christ is used over 25 times. Because as a believer, everything that we are and everything that we have is in Jesus Christ. And it's interesting because, I talked to my boy Antoine McGee. I talked to several people, like after my Wednesday night class, and they were kind of like, we're surprised that you were here. I had a couple people say that to me, and Antoine was even like, how was class? Like whenever I told him, I was like, yeah, we talked about that at class. He was like, oh yeah, how was that? Almost like surprised that I went. And someone had texted Kelly, and they were like, is Donovan still going to be at class tonight? And it wasn't even like a question to us. You know, he had the seizure Tuesday morning. We went to class Wednesday night, and I'm teaching a class at my church on Wednesday night. And it wasn't even like a question if we were going to go or not. To me, my response to that and my thought process behind it would be similar to what I said at the beginning when I said I panicked on the way there, but when I saw him, I was like, okay, I have to be the example. That's my response. Like, if I'm going to preach that I believe in Jesus, if I'm going to preach that I believe that Jesus is my confidence, if I'm going to preach that I believe Jesus is my peace, if I'm going to preach that I believe that we have been gifted, Ephesians chapter 1, with every spiritual blessing, verse number 3, in the heavenly places, if I'm going to preach that, then when a situation arises that is not favorable, or a sucky situation, or something that is not an amazing situation, do I really believe the things that I'm talking about if I'm not going to show up where I'm supposed to when things are a little bit difficult? To me, it's almost like, do I really believe those things? You know, so yeah, I'm going to be there, you know, on Wednesday night, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to lead Sunday school this upcoming Sunday, and I'm going to do that the best that I possibly can. I'm just going to show up and do what I can do with the opportunities that God's given me. But it's like, if I did anything otherwise, do I really believe in the stuff that I'm talking about? And so we're confident that God has Landry where he has him, ultimately for his good and for God's glory. And it might not be in the exact framing, the exact direction at this point that we want it. You know, obviously we wouldn't prefer for him to have had a seizure. We wouldn't prefer for him to have epilepsy, but God has some point behind this and some reason behind this. And to end it here, I just want to give a shout out to every single person. I can't even name everyone who reached out and told us that they were praying for us. People that I didn't even really know were reaching out to me. So many people from the podcast that listen. And one thing that was beautiful to me was, as Landry started, you know, throughout the day and getting kind of calmed down and things like that, I flipped through my phone and the text messages and the instant messages on Instagram and the people messaging me on Facebook and the people commenting on the posts that I put. And I'm counting, I'm like 30, 40, 50, 60, all these people that are reaching out and telling him they're praying for him. They're praying for Landry. They're thinking about him. And I showed it to him. And I'm like, bro, look at all these people. And his eyes, as I showed him, just got like as wide as saucers. And he's like smiling. And he's like, wow, that's a lot of people, you know? And I'm like, that's how many people are praying for you, bro. Like, and so if you are someone who reached out, if you're someone who said just a single prayer for my son, I think this was a faith building moment for him to again see like these verses, us praying. It's not just something that we do at night before we go to bed. Like, this is something that we apply in real life, and people coming alongside him and praying for him and him seeing that, like, this is a faith building moment for him. And so I can't even thank you enough for playing that role in my son's life. And so each and every person, I can't even name all of the people that reached out, but if you just said, again, like I said, one prayer, thank you so very much for building my son's faith and being an intercessor, taking his name to the creator of the universe and lifting his name up. We're just so grateful for the community that we had around us. So many people reaching out, so many people praying for us. It's one of those things like Ty Brazel is one of my favorite Christian rappers. And I think it's in his most recent album. He has a line where he says, in a crisis, you're really going to find out who Christ is. And we saw the body of Christ come to life like in an instant. So many people reaching out, our pastor meeting us basically at the same time that we got to the emergency room. People bringing us dinner. It's just been, the community we're so thankful. And words can't describe how thankful we are. And so that's really all I got. you know, I'm just going to end it in a prayer. I don't really know how else to do it. Lord Jesus, I thank you for each and every person who's watching this right now. I thank you that whatever's going on in their lives, our kids' lives, each and every person's life in this world, it doesn't come as a surprise to you, and you have their days numbered. It's all written out. You already know the outcome. And in the end, it's for their good and your glory. And so I pray that you would help us as we navigate this life, just to do everything that we can to bring honor and glory to you, to point to you, even in situations that seem bleak, even in situations that suck, even in situations that we're like, man, I wish this wasn't going on right now. Help us not to live in that. Like Landry said, like, I can't live here. I got to move on. I got to go home. I got to get to work. And so I pray that over each and every person, even myself in this moment. Help me not to fall into a place of living somewhere that I don't need to live. Help me to move on. And to the listener right now that might be living in something, help them to grow into what you have for them. And it's in your precious holy name I pray, Jesus. I thank you so very much for everything that you do. Amen.